Africa still lies in the long shadow of European colonialism, with the one difference that it's not any longer the backyard of Europe due to the recent shifts in global economic and geostrategic interests and activities. African governments have more choices today than they had 30 years ago, mainly through the expanding role of China, but also other of the so-called BRICS countries. And this is a challenge to the old vested European interests on the continent. And this means also that the EU has to reconsider its approach to the African continent in as much as African countries reconsider their approach to Europe. From a European perspective, migration is considered to be a problem that comes from Africa and should be solved by making the boundaries higher, by not providing a shelter to those who seek refuge in Europe. That does not solve the root causes of migration. I think there are two things that are necessary. The one is to create a much bigger awareness in European societies that migrants are nothing which is by definition bad. Most of the European industrialized countries need migrants, and not only highly qualified, but also for manual labor. They need to educate their ordinary citizens that migrants are not by definition a threat, but that migrants can add value, not only economically, but also culturally. So that is the main challenge. And the other challenge, in my view, is not to look at Africa from a security perspective, where one would discuss what can we do to keep them at bay on the continent. This is not how it works. We could witness a very tense situation in the post-Cotonou negotiations with the introduction of the economic partnership agreements, which from an African perspective and the perspective of the Caribbean countries was perceived as being divisive. Because what happened through the post-Cotonou agreements was that those countries were not any longer able to speak with one voice and put their weight behind one organization. And on the African continent, the EPAs were negotiated with different regional configurations to the extent that, for example, in Southern Africa, the SADC member states were grouped in 3 different EPAs, which is completely against the claim of EPAs to strengthen regional economic integration. It's very divisive, and on the African side, the EU negotiations over the EPAs have caused a lot of additional frustration and anger. So the current talks from the EU with a free trade agreement actually provokes suspicion, because the experiences on the African side is that the proclaimed win-win situation turns out to be predominantly a win situation again for Europe.